Okay.
So the museum, maybe you know, maybe you don't know the museum. It was opened in 2006, so we are quite young as a museum still, and we opened with a large collection, which was inherited from two former museums. One was the Musée des Arts d'Afrique et d'Océanie, and the second one was the Musée de l'Homme. And Musée de l'Homme was and is still existing, but at this huge collection and huge historical collection. So it means that the general collection, I mean object, photography, and all these type of objects were inherited from a museum which were designed and as an anthropological museum, which is quite the huge difference which appear when we open the Musée du Quai Branly, because the Musée du Quai Branly is not defined as an anthropological museum or as an art museum. It means we are between something, which is an interesting situation, which is not easy sometimes, but I think it's interesting to have this mix. And it's why sometimes it's difficult to define the museum, because it's in the middle of something. Mm-hmm. But it means that we have a large collection about all the continent except the European continent, which is the tricky and interesting thing of this museum too. The collection is like 300,000 pieces, object, three-dimensional pieces, and 700,000 photographic pieces. So it means it's a large historical collection. And when we opened in 2006, the question was how to talk about the contemporary world. And one of the response, not only the only one, but was the idea of trying to make research and to know more about actual practices in contemporary photography. So we started in 2006 with acquisition, but also with a biennale called Photocay, which exists between 2007 and 2015. And in 2008, we launched a program which is called the residency program, Programme de Résidence Photographique. And it's still running, and it means that every year we select 1, 2, or 3, generally 3 laureates who can be granted, receive funds for creating a special project. So maybe I show you some pictures of the museum. We are close to the Eiffel Tower, near the river Singh. Here the residency program with an Indian photographer, so I can't do that. Samir Tode, who was here in 2015. So this program is a possibility to give some money to make a special project, but we also invite the people in Paris to produce. We produce also the work after after a few months, and it allows the photographers to finish or to make a complete work with photography. Here you have some pictures of laboratory work with Daniela Edburg, working on some picture that we will have in the exhibition.
Okay, wonderful.
Example with Guy Telim and Gosette Lugondo 2 years ago. So this I wanted just to talk about this residency program because it's a very efficient way for us to have new works in the collection. I mean, we are able to buy on the general market some works, but this program allows some photographers, and some of them maybe famous photographers as Guy Telim that you just see, but it could be also Gosette Lugondo, who is a very young artist and who was not represented really by a gallery. So it's a good way to support and to acquire this kind of work. So let's go to the exhibition.
Yes, yes. Let's. Everybody's eagerly waiting to see what this show is about.
Yes, so we will start the exhibition with a kind of surprise. This part is dedicated to one work, a huge work by Samuel Fosso.
Sorry, Christine, maybe before you show us the work, can you just tell us a little bit about how did you conceive the show, and what were your thoughts, you know, and maybe then we can look at the artist works.
Yes.
Yes.
So I work on this show since I think 4 or 5 years. After we closed the Biennale, the Photo Quai Biennale, the museum asked me to build a project. So as I had this knowledge about some works that I saw since a few years, looking for acquisition or looking for general information. And so very often I had this feeling that I saw incredible works or I discovered incredible artists, which I don't have the possibility to see in France. And sometimes I discover some works in the UK or in Germany, or it depends. And so I think my responsibility is not only to buy works, but to show and to give the possibility to the people to discover some work. It means that very often when I speak with the exhibition, the people say, "Oh, what is a thema?" And I say, there is no thema, because I don't like the idea of building an exhibition by starting from ideas. Generally, as I'm a curator, I'm very linked to the pieces, and that's really the pieces which create the desire to show the pieces and to link the pieces between them. So that's why I choose also this complicated title, because the title speaks about the idea of creating links between things, and especially creating links with the view, with the gaze. So it's related to this idea of appropriation. It speaks also about landscapes, and so for me it was a good way to have a way to go in the exhibition, like a discovery, but also like a travel. I mean, an exhibition is for me really something that you see when you walk. It's a dynamic process. And so that's why I don't like the idea of resuming the exhibition, because I expect also that the viewer will have their own experience, and they will create their own links. But the idea is really to create these special links between pieces. So it's organized, but at the beginning, it really started from the idea and the desire to show some special works, or to show different works from a few artists.
Okay. Okay.
So we will start with Samuel Fosso. This is a huge installation with Polaroid pictures he made 4 years ago. Oh yes. And Samuel Fosso used to use the self-portrait since a very long time. And this work is very special because he doesn't have any makeup, any clothes, any change of his habit, his usual face. And the piece is built with the accumulation of I guess 666 is that right? Pictures, which are organized in a large space, like a labyrinthic space, and you are confronted with this face seeing at you, and I think it will be a very surprising way to go in the exhibition, and it's a way to destabilize a little bit the viewer when you arrive. You see this picture and it says, or immediately this question, who is gazing who, when you face with this kind of portrait, which are actually self-portraits. And then we go really in the first part of the exhibition, which is dedicated to people working with photography, with traditional photography, with people looking on this idea of what is the photography process, what is the act of taking a picture. So we will show works by Cynthia Soto and Daniela Edberg too. So this is kind of view of installation without the good lights, of course. So these both artists look for this idea of what does it mean to take a picture? Is it a way to extract something from the reality? And what is the idea of framing something? So an idea of the show. We will also have pictures from Lekasirika Jorn, who is a young Thai photographer who worked in Bangkok, in the suburb of Bangkok. So a view of the installation with the second wall, works by Guy Tilling. So all these first artists, except Samuel Fosso, made this work during a residency project. So these are part of the collection of the museum. Of course, the exhibition is built with some part of the collection and different loans. So some pictures by Tilling, a view of the installation, and the actual installation with all the light setting here. We also have works by Joa Cliff, who is from South Africa, like Guy Tilling, and she worked on different places with this very traditional black and white small pictures, beautiful, beautiful prints, and very, very impressive work. So this comes from the French National Collection. So it's finished now. And José Luis Cuevas also, who is a Mexican photographer, not so well known than Guy Tilling, but is really in front. We will have an interesting confrontation between these two photographers. And José Luis Cuevas went to Japan to make a research on the idea of reconnecting with the literary world of Kenzaburo Oe, the Japanese writer. And that's an interesting mix between his own universe and the world of Kenzaburo Oe. And so that was the first part, which is a quite large space in the museum. And then we have a second part, which will be smaller but very efficient too, called Recognizing Oneself in an Image. Sorry. And so here we will have this very important work of Santomo Phokang, which is a way to show again, yes, this is an actual view of the exhibition, which is a slide projection with reproduction he made a few years ago from a research in 14 families in Soweto to find and to look back and to find finally pictures of the Black bourgeoisie from the beginning of the 20th century in South Africa. And it's a very simple act of saying, yes, we don't know yet this picture. This picture disappears completely in a material way, but they also disappear completely from our common imaginary brain, from our really idea of what does the South African looks like. So it's a very important work, I think, and in this work, Santomo Phokang made comments which are also on slides. And one of these comment and question he asked is, who is gazing? And that's why I decided to pick this word for an English title for the exhibition. And this question is also completely related with the exhibition. So Santomo Phokang was a very important photographer. He passed away at the beginning of the year. And so I'm happy to have this very important piece in the show. We will have Samuel Fosso again with this self-portrait dedicated to the African spirits in this title like this, with the important people from Africa and America fighting for civil rights. And as I said, the exhibition is a way to connect the different works between, and this is an interesting connection between Samuel and on the table the work of Oscar Munoz, who is a Colombian artist.
Yes, the fight for rights still continues, you know, as of today as well, which is the sad
yes,
part.
especially, yes, as always, as always.
Mm.
So we will also have works by Chi-Wan John, who is from South Korea and made a research in Africa, looking for information on the way that North Korea is still exporting process and works and to some countries in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So the third part is this one. The images bounce off one another. It means in this part of the exhibition we will find works, photographic work, but also video works more mainly, mm-hmm. and works by Katia Kameli. This related to a storyteller who is telling in an empty theater, is telling movies. So he's telling story and describing movie that we can't really see. So a meeting between the work of Katia Kameli and in the background book Andrew work. So we will show 3 works from Katia Kameli, the roman Algérien, which is a very interesting work. I can't tell about each work, so I go to see Dayanita's work. Yes. So Dayanita is in this part of the exhibition with this kind of museum called Museum of Industrial Kitchen. So I'm sure that you will tell us things about this in a few minutes. So the interesting thing about this work is that it gives a lot of possibility to the curator to create his own choice. In this case, I decided to have this structure a little open like this, so you can see pictures inside. You can have a walk all around the work, and you can see here some pictures inside the structure. So of course, I think we will speak about this work and the special choice of this work in this exhibition. In this part, we will have Owian, a young Singaporean artist, with a very interesting talk, conference, installation about picture, about Hollywoodian pictures, but not only this. And the work by Dean Culey, which is the work that we were waiting for, and which will just arrive before the opening. So as you may see, it's a very huge work composed with different kind of work structures built with little pictures. So you may see that there is some obvious connection with Dayanita's work. Yeah. And so the pictures are made or installed in recto and verso, so we can see not inside, we can see between the pictures. And in front of this big installation, we'll have the hugest one by Boycotting, composed with 5 projections, composed with different kind of movies, family footage, different kind of movies, which are destabilized and crossed with this neon horizon. So this is part of the installation. It's not completely finished today, but it's going on. Rosangela Reno from Brazil, a very beautiful work too, with some lenses in the pictures that you can see, or you can't really see sometimes because they are covered with this kind of paper, protection paper that was used in the family album in the 80s. So it's very close from Dayanita's work. Mariana Castillo de Bal, also from Mexico, who works with video and the idea of archaeology, a very poetic installation actually. We'll also have works by Carlos Garaycoa. Carlos used a lot of different material in his work, but very often some photography. So he takes some pictures that he transforms after the printing. So sometimes could be a picture like this one, which is glued on a metal general support, and he draws and cut inside the paper these imaginary structures. So the metal behind the pictures reappear with the light, which is not so visible in this side picture, but the work is beautiful. And sometimes he put also threads to redraw again imaginary buildings or constructions on the picture. So another part of the work, the installation of the space. After that, we will go in the fourth part of the exhibition called Histories of Landscapes. And of course, Histories of Landscape could be also a title for other part of the show. But we will have here a huge installation by Sami Balogi. This is pictures taken in Venice Biennale when it was shown for the first time. We were very lucky to buy the piece a few months after that. So we will present it. It's a very, oh, this is in French, so it could be maybe difficult to understand. Maybe I can tell you about this piece, because yes, you have this little picture, which is a reproduction of an archive picture, which is installed right here in a new work. And on the back of the picture, you may see, we don't really understand what is happening here. It is called a fight against fleas, and each worker has to collect how much 50 fleas each day to receive some food. Mm-hmm. So starting from this, so we understand that this black thing here are dead fleas. And so Sami Balogi made a long research on this political urbanization, which was made in the city of Lubumbashi during colonial time. And the text written here is very cold description of the setting of sanitary cordon, I don't know, sanitary separation between the white part and the black part of the city. And the people in the city explain in a very scientific way, very clear languages, that this separation was calculated depending on the flight of the mosquitoes, because the mosquito can, of course, transport malaria and different disease. So with these different elements, Sami Balogi took real views from the actual city of Lubumbashi, where the separation is still there. And he made also research in the Museum of Lubumbashi, and finally found the insect which was collected during the colonial times. So these pieces bring together the box of insects and the actual view of the city. So as usually in the Sami Balogi work, it's a way to think about the inheritance of the colonization and actual place still in the city and in the society. So this it's a huge place, but I like to see this picture again because that was the last pieces we installed in March. It was a Friday, March 13, which is supposed to be a bad day, you know, 13 of a day. But we installed this piece speaking about sanitary respiration, just the day where we know that we will have to close all. So it was like a strange moment for me to do this installation.
Right.
So we'll have also work by Dinh Lê, but I have to go on, I think, and very beautiful work by Mario Garcia Torres, video work, the way they look at each other. And we will have the works by Heba. Amin. Heba is one of the 3 artists where we have 3 works in the show, so we are very happy of that. This is a picture made not in a museum, it's before. So this is a part of the installation composed with different little pictures. I think, yes, we have some details here, and I'm sure that Heba, we will explain you more detailedly with that. We also have here on the left some video monitors, which is the second work related with the mosquito eyes, as in the work of Sami Balogi. And we are also very happy to have this very new work that Heba showed just one time before, if I am next, which is a tapestry composed from a very historical picture. So just a few very bad pictures of the actual installation, but Heba has a huge space actually in this part of the exhibition. So we are very happy with that. We will show also some works by Shiraz Beju with video and picture, like Dayanita's kind of sculpture, something that you can close. And also the works by Gosette Lubondo. So as I showed before at the beginning, work made during the residency program. So Gosette made these pictures in Congo in a building, a school building, which is not used yet. And she created this kind of atmosphere of fairy tales with mysterious people coming in this space, and we don't know exactly what they are doing. And I think that the fact that we don't know exactly what is happening allows us to go inside and to construct our own histories about this space. So this is a special picture actually, because finally when the people from the communication worked on the picture, they decided to have this picture as a poster for the exhibition. So and it works very well actually, because you have this idea of you open something to see inside. So it was a good surprise to see how it was working. We will have here also another historical work by Mario Garcia Torres called Letter to Dr. H, which is a very beautiful work connected with the idea of observing the landscape, but also the changing in landscape and appropriation between landscape and art world. And finally, we will arrive at the end of the exhibition in the last part, which is called Passages in Time, and which is it's a place where we will see 3 artists from Latin America starting with Joshua Ocon. Joshua Ocon used to build his work. How do you say? This work is like Mario Garcia Torres used very often to reuse contemporary works made by other artists and think in a new way about it. And Joshua Ocon decided to reconstruct in a very ironic way the Joseph Beuys performance from 1974 on Coyote. And he titled the piece Coyoteria, which is a game between the idea of what is a coyote in the Beuys performance, with the idea of very romanticized linked with nature and with savage land and this kind of things. And the fact that in the Mexican language, coyote means the people that are doing bad things for the ones, or are stealing or building bad things. So it's a way to think about this old historical performance, and to think in a new way, very ironic way. And in this part, many works are working on the idea of irony. Actually, it's also the case with Alexander Apostol, with a video which he took in a historical, very beautiful villa in Caracas, Venezuela. And the villa was built in the 50s by Joe Ponti, a famous architect. And the architect had to give an answer to the couple who commit the house. And the man was very fond of safaris and these kind of things, and so trophies. And his wife was very fond of contemporary art. So the architect has to find a way to construct mobile furniture, and so we may see the world that are turning and changing, and going from a savage world to a very sophisticated beginning of 20th century art world. And there is a special sound, because the mechanic, which is quite old now, is not functioning very well today. So there are these kind of little sounds like, and it's so important in the idea of the piece. Yeah. We will see also some works by José Alejandro Restrepo, a Colombian artist, with some videos, and also this special video called Tecnología para Gentiles, which is a way to ask question about the heritage of the way the people used to give gifts to Indian, especially in Brazil. So it's a way to connect some actual extract from the Colombian or Brazilian television, and to connect it with some quote from the 16th century quote from the Jesuits, the people who went to Brazil to convert Indian people to Christianity. And another piece from Joshua Ocon. And we will close the exhibition with this work by José Alejandro Restrepo too, which is a work connected with an engraving made for Alexander von Humboldt in the 19th century, and a link to a description that Humboldt made about a trip he made in a very specific place in Colombia, a mountain very difficult to climb. And the artist likes very much this engraving of 19th century and decided to make his own version of the trip, of the same trip that he made, and a new version of this engraving with video. It means we have a connection between the black and white video, very grainy, and the engraving of 19th century, and a way to think about the different feelings and the artist may experience with this idea of traveling in a landscape, and also seeing and observing different things, different signs in the landscape. So it will be like that at the end. For the moment, it's like that because we just received the boxes yesterday. So I'm so happy to see these boxes. But yes, and so this is the engraving from Humboldt, which is the beginning of this piece. So we will finish the exhibition with this immersive piece.
Thank you.
I think it's a good way to finish.
Thank you, everyone. I think Christine just took us through the whole show, you know, and each part of the show that's very interestingly interlinked and connected. It's also very interesting to see how you have multiple works by some of the same artists, you know, that are part in these different sections as well. Thank you. And I'm opening the floor now to Dayanita and Heba in case if they have any questions or, you know, observations about the show. And Dayanita, would you like to come in and join us?
I think Heba has a presentation about her work. So why don't we continue with the thread of the exhibition?
Okay.
Because I don't have my work to show.
Okay. 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 So maybe, yes, Heba?
Sure. So should I just jump into presenting the projects that I've exhibited?
Tell us a little about the work and, of course, the slides that you have for us.
Sure. I'm going to share my slides in a second, but just to say that typical with a lot of my work, which involves a lot of extensive research, I often give these public presentations and these public talks that kind of coincide and go along with the works. So I'm going to basically rush through a very kind of dense research project that I've been working on for many years now. And to kind of give you a background that adds a lot of kind of levels of interest to the work. So I'll share my screen right now. Okay. And can see okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to start with this work, and as Christine showed us, it was a tapestry that was involved, that was installed in the exhibition. And this is the first documented photograph taken on the African continent, and it dates from November 7th, 1839, merely 3 months after France gifted the world with the daguerreotype. It was taken by French painter Horace Vernet, and along with his nephew in Alexandria. And basically they captured the exterior of Muhammad Ali Pasha's palace harem, which is one wing of the Rosenstein Palace. Sorry, you can see the text here, can you?
Yes, it's a little small, but we can see it. Yes.
I'm just gonna do this again. Here we go. There we go. Yeah. Okay, so even though there's nothing erotic about the image, it caused this fluster. It created a sensation when it was exhibited in Paris because of the fantasies that it conjured of what French viewers might envision as the suggestive subject matter, because it's the wing of the harem, right? And so due to this inaccessibility of the North African female subject, European artists at this time, and especially French photographers, invented this idea of romance by photographing the native woman to fit their vision and their fabricated delusion of what the North African woman was. So what interests me about Vernet's photograph, and of course this is not the original photograph, this is an engraving of the photograph, is that these hierarchical relations are in place, but the bodies themselves are invisible. So you can look at these windows, but you won't see any bodies. And the harem is not actually pictured, of course, but the idea of the woman is implied through this voyeuristic gaze, the technological device. And so even Vernet himself alludes to this predatory manner in which he's photographing. They documented very extensively their travels in Egypt in particular. And he quotes, he's quoted as saying they were daguerreotyping like lions. So of course this is very telling. And so he, of course, attempts to capture something intimate, something Europeans didn't have access to. And so the viewer is prompted to kind of look through these windows to see if they can sneak a glimpse of the secret, the secret harem. And so Vernet and his nephew, of course, were proponents of the civilizing mission. They came from a long tradition of Orientalist painting. And it was this European rationale that supported racist ideals about white superiority and colonization. And becoming civilized was to renounce native traditions. And yet, ironically, as Europeans were rushed to Africa to capture these marvels on the African continent, they perceived themselves as being exceptionally cultured. So I find this also quite ironic. And so Vernet and his nephew documented their travels extensively through both photography and writing. And they were, quote, glad to think that under the growing influence of French civilization, the region's slumbering reason will be awakened. And so, of course, when they arrive to North Africa, they find a very different predicament. In fact, Frantz Fanon talks about this idea of the occupiers' obsession of unveiling Algeria. And North African women became this focus of a European fantasy subject to a degrading stereotyping of women's bodies. And those came in the form of these postcards. It was sort of a quick and easy way to disseminate images of propaganda, basically the propaganda of sexual desire. Many of these postcards are clearly pornographic, and of course, they're staged to be explicitly sensual, and so they function very similarly to pinup photos, and their image is constructed by this dreamscape of Orientalist painting. And in fact, it was a completely fabricated image, and it was a tool of political propaganda for the colonial project. Sexualized representations of women came to represent the domination of territory. So this idea that I'm interested in is the direct correlation between women's bodies and geography or territory. And so their exploited bodies merged with the idea of claiming land. And so, of course, this is a very famous drawing by Albrecht Dürer called Draftsman Drawing a Recumbent Woman from 1525. And it illustrates this conquering of bodies in space by utilizing a mathematical method. So I'm interested in the ways the tool itself is used to then conquer the bodies. And in this case, the tool is the grid, and it's a device that's used to transform human figures into subjects. So obviously here the artist is positioned in a dominant role both over the subject and the space, and the grid becomes this tool of power that puts into question the sovereignty of the body, and in turn establishes control over its mobility. So especially when we're talking about vulnerable bodies, and especially in a contemporary context when we're talking about migrants and refugees, it's interesting to address the ways in which these technological tools are really controlling the mobility of the bodies themselves. But that also it's scrutinized through this Cartesian coordinate system. So it's not unlike the surveilling and mapping of land. And so photography in Africa in particular was utilized as a tool to visualize this vast scale of territory available for occupation, basically, depicting land as this open territory as if it wasn't kind of open enough. And so here you have these images that I find quite interesting, taken by photographer Carl Hugo Hahn, where he developed a technological device, a camera with a revolving panoramic lens, capable of photographing 180-degree landscapes for the purpose of visualizing the expansive environment. So the idea was to make it look even more expansive than it already was, to lure people in to kind of dominate the territory. And so there was this hope of Alexandria in the 19th century of becoming Greek again. And so for the first time since it was surrendered to the Arab army in 642, it was becoming this boom city that was often being compared to two other international cities, which were St. Petersburg and Odessa. And pictured here is the Ras el-Tin Palace, from which Vernet's photograph was taken, and the first photograph on the African continent. Construction for this palace began in 1834, and it took 11 years to complete. And it was commissioned by Muhammad Ali, who designed the style and designed in a style of an Italian Renaissance palace with Baroque and Moorish architectural elements. And today it serves as the president's palace, and is used as a naval base. So from this project, or from this image and the research that I've done, this image emerged this project, which I call Windows on the West. And as I said, I was really fascinated by the fact that this photograph was regarded as an erotic photograph, even though there's no bodies in it. And so I decided to take kind of the original image and transform it into a textile for several purposes. But the idea was to remove that technological gaze from the image itself. So what tools of technology could I use to eliminate not just the male gaze, but the male gaze that's embedded in the technology itself? And so, of course, weaving was an interesting choice because it's also a technology that's been grounded in Egypt for centuries. And by hand weaving it myself, I'm then kind of removing that kind of history of the technological gaze. So the term Windows on the West refers to this European interest in cities like Alexandria because of their innovation in the European style, both cultural and architectural. And in particular in its inclination towards becoming Greek again. So again, this idea of wanting to Europeanize Africa once again. And I'm just going to fly through this very quickly to kind of narrate the next section, but like Vernet, Bartholdi, a sculptor from France, was also fascinated by the grandeur of Egyptian monuments. And in the spirit of making Egypt more European, he had this dream to build a sculpture as grand as the Colossus of Rhodes in Egypt, again, bringing this idea of Europeanness to the African continent. But in fact, he designed her as a woman, and she would be called Egypt Bringing Light to Asia. She would be stationed at the opening of the Suez Canal, and Egypt, the beacon of Asia, would be carved on her pedestal. So he pitched this idea to the Khidewi Ismail, who rejected the proposal. This is in the mid-19th century, as he was already bankrupt from the construction of the Suez Canal. So interestingly, adamant to get her built, Bartholdi repurposed his design, and she became the Statue of Liberty gifted to the United States. And this neoclassical statue was designed in the image of Libertas, the Roman goddess of freedom, raising a torch and bearing a tabula ansata representing law. And so he toyed with this idea of holding a broken chain, but feared that an explicit reference to slavery would be controversial, but there's still a subtle chain at her feet. I bring her up because the story of the Statue of Liberty provides some context to this notion of freedom of liberty, and particularly to the concept of the nation state. So for whom does freedom and liberty apply, and for whom is it available? Of course, she now represents this entry point into, for migrants reaching North America, but it is important to understand the construct in which the nation state was constructed and for whom. So for whom are these borders actually built? And so in my work, I started really thinking about this idea of penetrating borders and what that performative action is. And so in 2014, I was going on a 5-month road trip from Lagos, Nigeria to Berlin along contemporary migration routes. And it was a project to kind of better understand the paths that African migrants are taking from Africa to Europe. And my idea was really to kind of address the bureaucracy of borders through the frameworks of citizenship, marriage, and language. And it kind of attempted to challenge these overly complicated structures of bureaucracy by uncovering intimacy in this otherwise kind of impersonal system. So I was interested in this idea that sounds like an oxymoron of bureaucratic intimacy, but basically gaining permission to travel itself becomes this transaction of intimacy with grossly unpowered structures at play. And I'll explain that a little bit more. But in order to complete this trip, I had to face an overwhelming repetition of power structures, and I had to apply for 12 visas before embarking on this journey. And so as I was going through this process, I was amazed at the cliches that kept unfolding in these bureaucratic institutions. You know, as a single woman with an Egyptian passport, I was constantly confronted with the lack of agency I had and the power games I had to play in order to be granted entrance. Of course, all these bureaucrats had all my data in hand, and so they knew everything about me. And so in an attempt to problematize and broaden this very narrow view of how we talk about contemporary crises, I was inspired by Japanese filmmaker Masao Adachi and his landscape theory, and this idea that suggests that landscape around us is an expression of the dominant political power. So while doing my research on the history of geography in West Africa and these territories that I would be traveling through, I came across this Arab Andalusian geographer named Al-Bakri from the 11th century, and his manuscript called the Book of Roads and Kingdoms. And it was basically the first comprehensive text that describes the geography of West Africa as a sort of scientific text, right? And so I was really drawn to this lyrical style of the text, which basically compiles accounts of merchants and traders and travelers who are traveling through the region and describing basically the towns that they encounter through their journey. But what really struck me about the text is that, in fact, the text detailed descriptions of women's bodies alongside the descriptions of cities and towns. So just one example of these texts, and it's quite pornographic in a way, reads, Abu Rastam al-Nafusi, who's one of the merchants of Adagast, informed me that he saw one of these women reclining on her side, and her child, an infant, played with her, passing under her waist from side to side without her having to draw away from him at all on account of the ampleness of the lower part of her body and the gracefulness of her waist. So that's one of the more PC versions of the book. But basically, I found interesting the ways in which the objectification of women's bodies is incorporated into the notion of geography. Of course, the sexual descriptions of their physical appearances became embedded in the landscape itself, not unlike Vernet's first photograph, right? And that voyeurism is mediated through these technologies of measurement and observation that deem it science. So again, it's justified. It's not only using the technological device, but then it's justified in a text that's considered a scientific text. So the ways in which women's objectification becomes a sort of science in and of itself. So this was really a pivotal point for me as I started to consider my own role as a woman and kind of going through this narrative that's not my own, and how I then become the voyeur and reinforce those same problematic structures that I'm attempting to critique. And so alongside my journey, I was visiting centers of photography and kind of not realizing that going through archival maps was also kind of a radical act. Perhaps even oftentimes I was seen as not just a voyeur, but as a spy. And so I'm just going to skip this really quick. And so it kind of occurred to me that more interesting than maybe photographing and using the camera as this technological device was to really go to the device that constructed these landscapes. So I explored them with a theodolite, and here you see a picture of an antique theodolite. And it's basically an engineering device that's used to measure the level of land for construction. So oftentimes you'll see engineers in the middle of the road with the theodolite. It, however, has a telescopic lens with crosshairs and is a predecessor for telescopic military weaponry. And so embedded in that object, again, are these structures of violence that you cannot avoid, that you cannot eliminate from the narrative of the image itself. So the project then became this way of exploring not only the gender dynamics, but objectification of vulnerable bodies. And so what's interesting about this device is I can point it at something, but I'm so far away because it's telescopic, so I'm not visible. And it becomes automatically this kind of hierarchy of spying on distant objects. So you can imagine how violent that feels, especially because it has crosshairs on the lens, how violent that feels when you point it at a body, and especially within the context of contemporary media narratives and political dynamics. So I'm just going to very quickly jump over this, but this idea is like, how do you reenact those power structures, and realizing that it's not sufficient only to restage them, but to actually perform them. And so these are what the images look like, and these are the images that are in the exhibition. Again, these are landscapes that I'm focusing on. I very specifically and adamantly eliminated the depiction of bodies, and was looking using Masao Adachi's kind of methodology of the narrative embedded in the landscape itself. So what does the landscape reveal about those power dynamics and the disparities and the kind of political imbalances of the people who live there. So these are particular landscapes in the migration story that are either points of conflict, borders, places where migrants get stuck, places where migrants are being held up, these kinds of things. And kind of being displayed alongside the text of al-Bakri's geography text from the 11th century, which basically could be thought of as this early expression of, this all too contemporary phenomenon of representing Africa at a distance. So again, these kind of problematic narratives of how the media talks about not just the migration narratives, but about Africa itself. So just to kind of give you a kind of closer look at some of these images, again, alluding to the presence of individuals and bodies, but without actually depicting them. So the theodolite as well is a tool that basically underwrites conquest and domination. And I was at first very uncomfortable with the idea, but specifically became interested in how do I make that even more evident, right? So for example, here you have a fence that separates basically Africa from Europe, but on the African continent. So this is the border between Morocco and Ceuta, the Spanish territory on the African continent. And, maybe a well-known kind of image from the media in kind of recent years talking about migrants who attempt to jump this fence in the hundreds, a kind of coordinated effort to get some people over. And the idea is that some people will get caught, some people will get killed, but inevitably there will be some people who make it over. And that's a risk that they're willing to take. But of course you can't go anywhere near this fence, but because I have this telescopic device, I can be very distant and photograph it and kind of include it as part of that narrative. So the question then becomes whether this tool or a tool is designed within a matrix of power dynamics, and can it be used as a means of liberation? And that's questionable, right? It's like this idea of Audre Lorde's The Master's Tools. Can we emancipate? Can we liberate ourselves from those political dynamics using the same tools? But for me, that's really not the main issue. The main issue is to kind of really make evident this lexicon that is this lexicon of domination that is embedded in these devices. And so, here's a very innocent image I've filmed of Africans on a boat, but within the context of a contemporary media narrative, we jump to these conclusions of this kind of domination lexicon of how these narratives are being told. So it's a kind of exoticization, a reclamation of the physical and psychological territory of a region that's inherently political, as well as an aesthetic act. So the project doesn't seek to provide a definitive genealogy of this lexicon, but it provides crucial clues into these etymologies of violence from which it emerged. And I'm just going to end with this last image, which is a video that's also in the exhibition. And it's footage of me crossing the Mediterranean on a boat in a way that many of these young migrants cannot. And basically in this contemporary moment, you cannot help to kind of look backward and look at the power and find those power structures within these histories of these scientific and technological tools. And I think that is incredibly important to bring that into the contemporary narratives. Like, we cannot separate ourselves from those technologies and the precursor of those technologies. And this kind of leads me to another project about proposing to drain the Mediterranean Sea, but that's a whole other lecture. So I'll end it there.
Right. Wow. Thank you. I mean, we went through, I think, a very large sort of conversation that I would like to open up now to Christine and to Dayanita, and also how this work, Christine, would you like to, or Dayanita, would you like to kind of share some thoughts on how these constructs, talk about who is gazing and how it connects? Would any one of you like to share some thoughts?
I don't know, Dayanita, do you?
No, maybe as we go along. I can't think of anything immediately.
Okay. Okay, Christine, would you maybe then let's, thank you, Heba, for sharing such an extensive
thank you.
insight to the work and to the research, actually, traveling through all these countries and, bringing out not just the histories, but this notion of the body, being used as a political propaganda, as you said. It's very interesting how, as an artist, you have used this eye to sort of bring that into the conversation and into your work. And maybe we should also talk about the Museum of Industrial Kitchens, because I would like to understand from Christine, and of course, Dayanita, we would love to hear from you as to your thought process with this work, and would you like to share a little more about it with us, please?
It's a little difficult because I don't have any images of the work. The museums are such that because of the museum acrylic that's in them, I don't really get to see it till it's installed somewhere.
Right.
And I like that idea as well, that I create a work that is almost like a toolkit for the curator. And so I think the Museum of Industrial Kitchens has 25 images, Christine?
Yes, a little bit more, I think.
20 on the outside and a box inside, or 2 boxes inside?
3 boxes inside.
3 boxes inside. Yeah. So I don't remember the exact number of images, but basically the idea is that Christine should be able to open and close the flaps that you saw.
Yes.
At 90 degrees, at one side open, another side closed, all of it closed, so it's like a pillar. Right. But to be able to change the images. And I would really request Christine every few days to go in and change the image. And I find one of the things that is really deathly boring about photography exhibitions and photography biennales especially is that everything is so static. It's just stuck to the wall. The curator nails it onto the wall and they're gone. And they're the docents at the museum or volunteers at a biennale, and that's it. And that's what I really hate about what has happened to photography in its history, is how it gets fossilized behind a frame and a glass and sort of, in my opinion, dies on the gallery or the museum wall. And it was always a problem for me. And I come from the idea of you make photographs to make a book. So for me, the book comes first, and the exhibition is really a catalog of what was in the book. So when I would go into an exhibition, I was I was always a little disappointed. And so I had to develop this form by which I could rescue my images from the wall, rescue my images from the unchangeability. Because even in my own exhibition, in a gallery even, let alone a museum, I couldn't change the images. And a very important part of photography is what the image is placed next to. So the same image of the girl on the bed can have 100 different meanings depending on what image it's put next to. And so that's when your own politics, your own agendas come in, when you start playing with the images. But the art world, the museum world, the biennale world doesn't allow you that space. And for the longest time, I thought somebody will have worked it out. And then I found nobody had worked it out. Everybody was quite happy in this deadpan way of showing photography. And so I had to develop my own structures, and that's when I made Museum Bhavan. Yes. And those were 9 museums that I showed at the Hayward Gallery, and they were meant to live in this apartment, in this room, with the idea that you would take an appointment and come to see one museum one day, and then that museum gets pulled out. So almost like a library of museums. What I didn't realize was that all the museums would be acquired by other museums. And so once all the museums got acquired, I was a little torn, and that's when I made the box, the center letter box. But, sorry, not the center letter box, the Museum Bhavan box, which was a continuation of center letter in a way. And so in my Museum Bhavan, there was a museum of machines. Yes. And at the end of Museum Bhavan, I was very interested in the idea of shedding, and I built a museum of shedding, which is what Christine had originally wanted to show, and which I made a little GIF, so I can just share that with you right now. And that'll tell you a lot about how the museums work. So this is Museum of Shedding with its bed, the museum with the images, 2 storage cabinets to the left where you can take out images to change them very quickly. A structure has been developed that allows you to do that very fast. Here's a desk that can cover the bed. It comes over the bed. And this is a table for eating and a stool that fits inside the table. So everything, all this furniture fits under this bed. And the idea was to reduce the space that we occupy to, even if you have a large room, to just be able to live just with this. And this Museum of Shedding is going to come back to my house and live here. And my plan is to live inside it on this bed. And to see if one can just reduce completely what one wants. But what I always want is the changeability of images. And so here's Museum Bhavan, Museum of Shedding. That's the back of Museum of Shedding. So if you turned it around, Inside it, you see all these boxes. The boxes are the only way to put it on the wall because the prints are unglazed. So if Christine suddenly thought, or her assistant said, oh, I don't want to look at photographs in this structure. I want to look at them like we've always looked at them. I want them on the wall. And she or he would get into a lot of trouble for doing that because the prints are not glazed. So they're not really meant to go on the wall. And if you do that, you risk, you know, whoever you borrowed the work from, because if it gets damaged, then you have to pay a lot of money. So that was another way of enforcing that no curator or assistant of a curator suddenly thought, I've got 150 prints in some museums. Let me put them all on the wall. There are times when I have agreed to that, but I think two times only. And that too with my AP, so that, you know, if the damage happens, it's my damage. Otherwise, you've got these boxes and all these, there are 40 images that the structure can show and 33 that can go into 11 boxes. The 40 prints in the structure go into these storage cabinets. So that's with all the images. That's from the back. That's when it's empty. That's when it gets a little, this is the kind of situation I would have in my house. Now all the images have gone into the storage cabinets and into the boxes. And these two stools fit under here. And finally, this is it. So that's the work that we had wanted to show. And I think because the French government had bought the Museum of Industrial Kitchen, and there was a lot of shipping involved for this museum because it's 2 crates, they decided to show the Museum of Industrial Kitchens. And the Museum of Industrial Kitchens is interesting because it's a, what's the word, like a compendium museum to Museum of Machines.
Right.
I can try and show you Museum of Machines, and so you get an idea where it comes from. That's Museum Bhavan at the Hayward Gallery, then at KNMA. I'm just going to do a very quick walkthrough. Gives you an idea, but this is all on the Google Cultural Institute. That was, I think, the smartest thing I did. That when it was at the Kiran Nadar Museum, I found a way to put it on the Google Cultural Institute, so that now that the museums are all dispersed, anybody can see the museums on the Google Cultural Institute. I think it's called Conversation Chambers Museum Bhavan. So anyway, this is just, we are still walking through various museums, going close and looking at details. Museum of Furniture, which is a cousin museum of Photography. Earlier we had Museum of Little Ladies and the File Museum, which are sister museums. So there's sister museums, there's cousin museums, and then there is a standalone Museum of Machines, which is what we're getting to. Yeah, there it is in front. And for the Kiran Nadar Museum, it had a stool inside, and I made it into a conversation chamber with the possibility that you could, not a conversation chamber, sorry, a confession chamber. What are they called? A confession room, I can't remember. Maybe it says here, a confession chamber, yeah.
Confession chambers, yes.
Visitors are invited to make their appointments to enter and sit on the stool inside to commune with their favorite machine. So this was acquired by the Mast Museum in Bologna. And I went back to all the work that I had been doing with the factories. For about 2 years, I was very obsessed with factories. And I realized that actually, along with the machines, what was very special was the machines that were made for the food for the factory workers. And so there are these giant dosa making machines, roti making machines, but all sort of analog machines, you know, machines made for a certain purpose. Right. And so the Museum of Industrial Kitchen was made as a, is the word compendium? like a compendium volume to the Museum of Machines. So if there was more of a budget, then I may have said that maybe Christine's museum could get Museum of Machines from Bologna and then show it along with the Museum of Industrial Kitchens. So now what will start happening is that curators will do their own pairing, where they might ask the Met for the Museum of Photography, Bologna for the Museum of Machines, and the French government for the Museum of Industrial Kitchen, and see if that works together, or the archives, you know. So I've sort of deposited museums in different parts of the world, in different museums, and now it's really over to the museums. And what I got out of it was the Museum Pavan box, which allows me to share it with people whenever the possibility is there. You know, it's that box with 9 accordion fold books in it. Yes. So that's really the background to the, I can stop the sharing. That's the background to Museum of Shedding, which is what we were going to show first, Christine, and then the Museum of Industrial Kitchen. And
yes,
I know how beautifully Museum of Shedding would have worked in your exhibition.
Yes.
With some of the images of, and then with the change that I made to Museum of Shedding, you know, with the new images. But then how does that upset the flow of your thought when you've conceived, you know, Museum of Shedding must have been one of the pieces that you had built the show around, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then any one of the pieces that you showed us, if Heba's piece suddenly was not available, it really throws off the curator, no? Because you've thought of the whole thing. It's a whole symphony that you've made, and then you're told that you can't play the G minor for some reason.
Yes, but actually, when I talk to you and the gallery say yes, we have different possibility of exhibiting, and you propose a Museum of Shedding, which I like it very much, and so we work on this idea, and we had the space and the budget actually to have the piece, but a few years ago I was in acquisition committee in the French National Collection, and I knew that they wanted to have a piece by you, and I knew, because I'm a curator, I know exactly how it is difficult sometimes to convince the people to buy works and things, and so I knew that they tried it, but I didn't know that finally they succeed. So. And one time when I was speaking with my colleague from the French National Collection, he said, "Oh, you know, but finally we succeed. We bought this work by Dayanita." And I said, "Oh, really? Did you?" So that's crazy. And so I had to think: do I prefer to show the original work, which is more huge in terms of space and etc., and maybe has more possibility of playing with pictures. So I was very interested by this idea. But on the other way, as a curator, I think I had to support the work from my colleague. And that's also important when you are a curator, to get the possibility to the public to know that this special piece, this special work is in this type of collection, and especially in public collection. So for me, it was also a choice to change in order to make a publicity to this acquisition, and to give the possibility to other curators to know that this piece is available in French collection. So finally, I say, okay, we will have the piece that they bought, because it's a very good sign for the French acquisition to be able to buy this kind of work. So I wanted to say it. So it was not a budget question, actually. It was, you know, this kind of political question.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I assumed it was a budget question.
No, not this time. Sometimes this time. But I'm very happy with that, because when I discovered the work, because I didn't only buy pictures and etc., it was really so funny for me to choose and say, yes, I want this on this, and to try different ways, different combinations.
Are you going to put any of the boxes on the wall?
No, we didn't put boxes on the wall.
But you know you can, no?
Yes, we can, but it's not easy because of the security, as you said. And so we'll have this this structure. And
no, but just for you to know, the boxes are completely secure. You can put them on the wall.
Yes, we tried, actually.
So what was the problem?
No, there was no problem. I think it's, I prefer the idea of looking for pictures by going inside the structure. Because as you said, usually we have, the picture on the wall, that's all. So that's interesting to have this idea that you have to look for and to go around and see what, and sometimes you don't see very well, but you have to think about what you are
you should
seeing.
Also maybe say to people they can come back and see a different configuration of the images.
Yes, I guess I have to convince my colleague that we will change the picture during the presentation.
Oh, absolutely, you must.
I think yes, because now I know how we can do that quite easily.
Yes.
So it doesn't seem so impossible now.
It's, you just change one picture, and of course people don't register it, but it makes them look again. Subconsciously, they know something has shifted. Yes. They won't be able to say it. I know that for sure. And that to me is the problem with this fixedness of photography on the wall. So I find photography is really way too rigid for what the medium is about,
Yes, but
the formats are too few and too, it's quite sad for photography, because as Heba's work, photography can go in so many different directions. And yet traditional photography remains on the wall, in the Biennale, in the festival, in the museum, in the gallery.
Well, but I think it's evident, the ways in which, of course, a lot of the works that Christine showed us from this viewing, installation works. In the case of my work, we have a tapestry that's being shown in a photography exhibition. So I think also this idea of photography goes beyond this very traditional notion of capturing an image with a camera, as in the case of my work, and all those images that I'm displaying are not photographs taken by cameras. So I think there's a lot of room to kind of, when we talk about photography conceptually, I think a lot of room to kind of play with what image making actually means. And I think that becomes really fascinating, and especially in this context. And Christine, I'm very curious, because I think this exhibition kind of goes up at a very critical time. Interestingly, that it's been delayed because of a pandemic, but at the same token, now you have all these protests that are coming up, and the ways in which uprisings and protests are being captured through technological devices, through image making, but also the Quai Branly Museum, as with all other museums, has its own kind of problematic structures. We just saw that there was an attempt to steal one of the ethnographic objects from the museum. And so I'm really curious, in the context of everything that's happening now and the fact that this exhibition is opening now, how does that discussion then change, if it does, for you, in terms of what these kind of works speak to with what's happening right outside the museum doors?
Oh yes, it's an interesting situation, because yes, I experienced that even if I worked on this project since a few years, when each time you go further, you have a new way to understand what you are working on or what you are showing on. And yes, I realized, as I said, when we installed this piece by Sami Balogi in a very special moment, it changed completely the perception also of the piece. And I'm sure that yes, the new context is finally changing very quickly and more quickly than we expected. So if I compare the situation 3 months ago and now, it's completely different. And as I said, in terms of general politics of the museum, we have a new president too. And so it allows us also a new direction, a new way of thinking. So yes, it will be interesting to see how it create echoes and different reactions and different understandings.
I just want to, Heba, just want to go back to what I was saying, and you were responding to that. I'm talking about a traditional kind of photography in a traditional space, which is a documentary photography. I know that the moment you go into installation, you can do what you like with the image. But a traditional space hasn't changed very much. Christine's show is fantastic because I think there's hardly any example of a traditional kind of work in it. So that from the photography point of view, I think your exhibition, Who is Gazing, points to so many directions that photography has taken, so many, each work. Mm-hmm. But if you think of a photo festival, or you think of a photo biennale or a photo gallery in a museum, it's still very much on the wall. So that's what I was giving as a background to why I made these structures. In this exhibition, that is not even a question really, because everything has its own form and it's being treated like that. It's being given the room to breathe like that. So I wanted to clarify that.
Actually, I was thinking a few days ago to your work, because as you said about the importance of books and of showing your pictures through books, it means a special object that you can manipulate, and you can go in this sense or the other one and extra. Because in this special moment with the pandemic, everything which has to be touched is like a dangerous object, And so in a museum, we had to rethink all the way to work in the exhibition, and to think if there is nothing that the people need to be touched and extra. So of course, it was not problematic in this show, but at the entrance, we may have a display of books, and suddenly the books become dangerous, because it's something that people touch. And so I was interested in this idea, and especially about this feeling of touching thing that you may see in your pictures too.
You know what we could have done? I didn't think about it before. Is that you could have taken the Museum of Machines book from the Museum Bhavan box and put that on a shelf at somewhere behind and that would then, if necessary, give the relationship to the other work. But while the book may have become a dangerous object in the museum space, I think the book is going to really become the form for a lot of artists, a lot more artists than we realize right now. Because during this pandemic, I think many people have said to me how much they have enjoyed having my Museum Bhavan box and opening it out and having exhibitions of their own, having an opening for themselves. It's not because they love my work so much, but just because people want a tactile experience. And since they couldn't go to the museum, there's photo books. I believe the sales of photo books have gone up, at least for Michael Mack. So I'm actually thinking that perhaps from this time of COVID, there will be a different relationship to the book. And many artists who actually, like me, start to think, do I want to travel so much? Do I want my artworks do I want to spend so much on shipping them? What is the carbon footprint of that? And if I could make a book, which is also a sculpture, which I can just FedEx a small package to you that then opens out and becomes something else, like just maybe the Museum Bhavan box. And that's it then. That can be my exhibition. And especially if we get over the idea, again, talking about a traditional world which says the print is the original and the book is the reproduction. But now with digital, and that was the case when we were in the analog world, you made a print and then it was scanned, and then you make the plates, and then the book was printed. But now it's the same scan that makes the book or the print. So it's for me to say the book is the original. Who's to say? Who can tell me what the original should be? No, it's the same scan. So I think we're going to have a lot more of that questioning, and new forms will come up. And I'm certainly already thinking about how I could go further with the idea of the book as the exhibition. And can the book then become an experience? Can it expand into your museum? Can it contract when it's coming to FedEx, you know? Or even if somebody is just, whatever, in the normal post even. Can I just send you lots of little packages with our speed post? And whatever reaches, reaches. What is lost becomes an exhibition in somebody else's house. So somehow also to become easier with art and come down to earth a little bit, because art was also sort of going, you know, the gallery world was exploding. And I think the book will become a very important form in the future, and it'll take so many different forms that I can't even tell you now. That very soon, by next year, we'll see what different artists are doing with books. Like Heba. Heba, have you worked with books? Do you have anything you can show us?
Not prepared, but I think that you know, with the advent of the digital, I mean, that this idea of the original image has always been in question, right? Of like the duplication and where's the original versus the duplicate. And I think that is something that a lot of artists have been grappling with, right? As we kind of break this infrastructure and this architecture of the art world of like the fragile and the work of art that you know, has a lot of worth, right? I mean, that kind of has, in many ways, many artists have thrown that out the window anyway, right? Because we're working in duplicates, we're doing multiple exhibitions at the same time with the same works, because we're able to, you know, ship things in various directions. So I think already the questioning of the image and image making has been happening for a very long time. It's inherent in the inception of image making, right? Like, and so,
but I don't see that. I don't see that in the museums or the galleries. People may have been, I haven't seen the forms that have developed from that. And I look out for it. So it's probably a question in many people's minds. They're grappling with it in different ways. Again, I'm talking about fairly traditional photography. So
right, but there's also different art worlds, and so I think also what the pandemic has revealed is, of course, it puts forward this questioning of how do we deal with the tangible object, and of course with all experiments with these kind of virtual territories, which by the way has been happening for a while already. But we see the ways in which there's a complete disconnect and in a way in which the infrastructure of the art world is failing us, as you're addressing. And so for me, I find that in my own practice, I've become a lot less preoccupied with the objects or object making, even though of course what I'm showing in this exhibition are objects. But I become much more preoccupied with the political discourse, the intellectual discourse, and maybe even the subversive discourse that the work might instigate. And so for me, of course, very important, and Christine, this is why I kind of brought this issue to the forefront again, is this idea of, you know, now we're talking about the problematic ways in which museums function, in the light of Black Lives Matter, in the light of kind of class and economic disparities. We're readdressing colonialism, we're readdressing the ways in which museums function, but a museum like Quai Branly, especially with it having this kind of ethnological background, right? We're now kind of talking about like, how do we engage with these institutions and bring that discourse to the forefront? And so my strategy as an artist is, it's very important for me to show in institutions like this. I don't take the approach of boycotting these institutions, but rather, how do I show my work in those kinds of institutions to override the existing narratives that are problematic, or to kind of to cause a sort of a confrontation of discourse, right? Mm-hmm. And so for me, again, it takes me away from, I'm not necessarily interested in the object, although of course in this kind of exhibition there has to be an object, but for me the success of the work is going to be about, does this engage a particular conversation or not? Does my work or does art have that power to then change people's minds about, to change histories, to change, you know, narratives, to ask us to question ourselves and how we're complicit in these very problematic systems. And so, so I am at this point in time finding the exhibition format or the ways in which we exhibit photographic works a lot less important. In my personal opinion, I'm much less preoccupied with how a work exists in a space than you know, what kinds of dialogues it conjures.
But that, of course, I mean, that's what all work is about. It is about, does it make any dialogue? Does it make any political comment? Is it engaging people? But of course, but equally, photography needs to find many more forms. I'm talking specifically about photography. So of course, one wants there to be a conversation from the work. I mean, nobody is just going to be talking about the object, no? What's the point of that object if it's not going to make a conversation?
I mean, I think a lot of artwork does function like that.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying, Heba. That's
no,
art.
I'm saying that a lot of artwork is about the materiality, right? And this is, you know, the commercial artwork very much functions like that, right?
Yes, yes, of course, and that is the problem.
I think it's about how far these narratives go, right?
Mm. Yeah, that's what some of us are trying to do. Some of us are trying to subvert that.
Yes, to answer to Heba, I think also that this is a very important point also to notice that yes, the place where the show is visible is also important, and that's because it's important for me to work with contemporary works in this museum because the sense of an exhibition in this museum wouldn't be the same in another museum, and especially, I don't know, in art or typically art contemporary museum. So the place where the show is visible change also the general meaning, sure. So that's why it's an experience. We will see what's happening.
And how many people will... Sorry, go ahead.
Just to kind of add to that, Christine, how do you think that this exhibition also engages the existing? Can you hear me?
Not so good. Can you?
Yeah. So I was just curious, like how you feel like this exhibition is in dialogue with, you know, this other side of the museum, you know, beyond the photographic collection. How is it for you in dialogue with the museum's kind of identity and collection?
I don't know. It's a good, difficult question because I work in this museum. I have this point of view of what is a museum from the inside, and so my point of view is completely related with my everyday life in this museum, and that's always fascinating for me to know. To hear from different people the idea that they have of this museum, because I see the image changing during a few years, and depending on people, they say, oh yes, this museum, oh I like it so much, oh I hate it so much. That, and sometimes you say, okay, I can understand why, but sometimes you don't know. So it's, for me, I make the show. I have my own idea about what is connecting here, what will be possible to produce, but I'm sure that we will have a lot of surprise, and that's also why I like to create exhibitions, because it's you have your idea, you can plan some different things, but the public will see completely different things sometimes, and it's very interesting. That's why it's important for me to be able to see and to visit the exhibition many times during the time that the exhibition is still there. Because sometimes you create an exhibition outside the place you live, you see the exhibition, you open, and finally you don't know what's happening with the public. And it's so rich, so interesting to have the point of view of the public, and to sometimes to realize that, okay, they didn't understand what you wanted to say, but sometimes they understand very different and very clever thing that you even not imagine at all. So it's really, as I said, it's really experimental for me, always.
I haven't been to the museum for some years now, but you know, when you first said exactly, I thought, like, why am I showing my work in an ethnographic museum, you know? But then we met in Kochi, and I said, fine. But I think perhaps because you're not a contemporary art museum, you could be so flexible with the works that you've selected. And if I can think correctly, I don't think there's a single traditional photography work that I'm talking about in the show. So in fact, this exhibition of yours becomes for me the way to say to people that look at how all the different forms that photography can take, that photography can just be a starting point, that it doesn't end with the image. And so maybe because you're not a contemporary art museum, you could make this very bold, at least from a photography point of view and many other points of view, quite a radical exhibition, both for the ethnographic museum, maybe not, but certainly for a photography-based exhibition. Because I think in all the works, photography may be just the raw material, it's just a starting point. So what may have been the limitation, you know, the ethnographic museum, why do they want to show this? You actually show photography in a completely, as I think it needs to be seen now, you know?
Yes, but
I must congratulate you for that.
Thank you very much. But that's one of the interesting point and difficulties, as I said, because as you said, sometimes people think that we are an ethnographic museum.
Yeah.
And sometimes people know that we are not. But they know that we are not only contemporary art museum too. And when I spoke with different artists since a few years, that's very interesting for me also to notice that sometimes some people may be a little afraid because they know, oh, what kind of museum is it?
Yeah.
Really? Is it fine for me or not? And sometimes they say, oh yes, I want because it's this museum, and it's something between. So that's interesting to see also this type of reactions, because yes, it means something.
Right. So thank you all, three of you. Like, it's been such a powerful and engaging conversation, taking us back through histories, through forms. And I hope we can take a few questions now. Is that all right?
There's a good question for Heba, I can see.
Yes. So there are a couple actually. I'll start with Heba. Heba, can you comment on the ownership of identity of an artist in this visual matrix that I suppose that we all live in? That's the question.
In this visual matrix?
In these visual times, I think that's what the person meant.
Oh, I thought they meant Heba's work.
I'll just read out the question again.
Okay.
Sorry, 1 second. Can you comment on, it's an anonymous question, can you comment on the ownership of identity of an artist in this visual matrix? I guess perhaps, I don't know if I'm understanding it right, it comes from your passport photos, you know, the information being out there, and the artist work also that exists. Maybe that's how I understand it. I don't know if that's something that you can answer.
I'm not sure I entirely understand the question, and I'm not sure how that is, if the person is addressing the idea of identity. I'm not sure where identity and ownership for me are two different things. So
right.
It's this idea that, you know, because material is so easily disseminated online, that then I lose control over the ownership of my work, or is it really then about how identity is, you know, formed from engaging with these kinds of tools? I don't know that I.
Did you work out the question?
Yeah, I don't know if I really have a straight up answer to that, but I think for me, in terms of my work, you know, conceptually, my work mostly, in fact, deals with the ways in which these kinds of technological constructs shape our identity. And for me, it's very much a part of the narrative that has to somehow come to the forefront. So if I'm doing, you know, a performance online or a lecture online like this, that needs to be part of the narrative in which I'm addressing it. The context is important. And so for me, it is also why I very kind of rigorously consider the spaces in which I exhibit my work. And what kind of dialogue then that has with that space. So I don't know that I am fully answering that question, but I think
I hope that is what the person wanted to know.
But I think the ownership issue and more also identity is a kind of a very difficult term for me to grasp in this context. But maybe kind of also addressing the complicity in the tools and the spaces that we engage with. And so for me, I feel like in my work, I always have to be upfront with that and question myself and question others, but it becomes an open question, right? I don't have any definitive answers or definitive statements through my work, but rather like, how can the work be a process in which you reveal the complexity of those engagements?
Right, thank you, thank you. Dayanita, there's another anonymous attendee who's asked a question for you. Is there a sense of loss when these beautiful museums get acquired by other museums, and what do you then get to keep back with you?
Brought it to show you.
Yeah, yes, thank you.
So that's the box.
Yes.
And those are all the museums inside.
Right.
And for example, Museum of Machines.
Lovely.
Right?
Yes, thank you.
So this box was made which title? So that it could be bought anywhere in the world. You didn't have to, you know, that you could order it wherever you were.
Yes.
And going back, Heba, to the idea of the commercial gallery space and what's unique and all of that. This was my way of responding to it, where inside we have these, you know, Steidel's normal print run, 3,000 such books were made, sets, right? But I made 3,000 unique boxes so that each box, each cover is unique. And that was my way of saying to the art world, to the commercial world, like, you know, is this box mass produced? Does it go into your library? Or is it a unique art object because no two boxes look the same? So that kind of, it's even in that, it's like everything that I do, I must be having this agenda of provoking and challenging the art world and its limitations as I see them for photography. So the book is not, doesn't give you the same value or is not given the same value because it's reproduced, right? But then I have another format for that. It's like bring on the questions, bring on the, and I love that challenge. I love the problem of that. And so there are some works, and I make these book objects through spontaneous books, which is me, where there are no prints. So like, you know, nobody can come to me and say, can I have a print of the Museum of Industrial Kitchens? One museum was made. It's now going to be touring in France whenever it's needed. And that's it. I might, however, make a little box with those image cards. And then that's, so I love when I show my books on the wall, these boxes, and people come and they say, oh, I love that image. I'd love to have a print of it. And I say, I'm really sorry. It only exists like this. So at every level, one is trying to actually push, you know, even though the box was made so that I could have the museums here and my friends could look at the museums, and because, you know, who can say when the museums will be shown again, because storage is a big part of these acquisitions. And so what's the afterlife then of the work? So therefore the box was made. But then in that too, can I insert this question of value? And luckily for me, Untitled is such a great supporter. So 3,000 empty boxes, Heba, were made in India and shipped to Untitled, who then put the books into it. Yes. But it was sold for 70 euros. But it could equally have been sold for much, much more because each box was unique. But I didn't want to tell people that in the beginning because then people start hoarding these things. So now that it's out of print, I tell everyone, actually, you got something unique. And now people are saying, oh my God, I gave it to my niece. I did this, I did that. And I'm interested in where the museum will slot it, you know? Will it be in your section in the books at the entrance, Christine? Will this box be there?
Not this one. We'll have Museum of Chains.
Okay. It would be nice to have this one though, because it's...
Yes, but I have to, problem of space because you can't have too much because...
no, I'm saying instead of Museum of Chance.
But yes, we'll have a Museum of Chance. And we are still looking for the book that Heba just published. And I say, no, we
What
can't
is it
find
called, Heba?
The book that I just published?
Yeah.
Christine, are you talking about related to another project? It's called the...
Yes.
Yeah? Yeah, it's called The General Stork.
Yes.
It's Sternberg Press.
You don't have a copy on your desk? Oh,
No,
I would have liked to see that. I would love to see what kind of books you make.
Sure, I can share it with you.
Thank you, Dayanita. Thank you so much for sharing with our audience this lovely museum box. I'm sure quite a few of us might already be familiar, but it's very different when the artist is talking about their own work and showing it to us. It makes it even more special. I'll just maybe take, in the interest of time, I'll just take one last question. Heba, this comes to you from Pallavi Kishore. She says, hi Heba, your experience is familiar to me as a single Indian woman. Are you saying some of the African Arabic writers were also commodifying women's bodies? It's a slightly long question, I'll just read it out. However, my question is more about your reflections on the nation state. So were you seen as a spy even in your own country in Egypt? I have always wondered what could motivate the idea of homogeneity and territory, which form the basis of the nation state, thus excluding diversity and differences. Why is this so important to the European Westphalian nation? That's large.
But large and complex.
And complex.
First part of the question, she was asking if bureaucrats...
Are you saying some of the African Arabic writers were also commodifying women's bodies?
Oh yeah, I mean, right, yeah, of course. I mean, and that's the idea, is that throughout a very long history, women's bodies have been commodified as part of science, right? And written within the structures of science and technology. And so that was what became interesting to me, and it was spurred by this very personal experience of having to go through this nation state construct of applying for visas to travel through these territories, right? That realizing that I do not have the freedom, my body does not have the freedom to travel through these spaces. And so then what became the structures that I had to go through, which then causes this questioning of, you know, where are those disparities and privilege. Of course, I also acknowledged my position of privilege in that context as well. But then when you talk about borders and when you talk about these notions of freedom, of liberty that are so trite in most places, who are they actually available to? And the ways in which this kind of European ideal of the nation state construct really had a very particular, you know, body and mind as to who, you know, freedom and liberty are available to, even on, you know, and especially in the colonized territories, but in their own territories as well. And so it becomes interesting to kind of bring those two things together. And that's why, you know, coming across this 11th century geography text that is essentially a pornographic novel, became a really fascinating convergence of those ideas and the ways in which that infrastructure is very much still around today, right? And so I was grappling with, how do I confront that? How do I address that? And so this journey that I took was a constant questioning of that. And it doesn't attempt to answer to it, but it attempts to kind of, for me, even just on a personal level, to understand where do I fit within that matrix, and then how does that allow me to speak to kind of a broader context. So that those are very long kind of topics of research that engage almost all of my work, and so I'm constantly asking those questions.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. And I think we are just in time to, it was a long session today. Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your valuable time with us and our audience. Thank you, Heba. Thank you, Dayanita. And thank you, Christine, so much for giving us a preview to the show. Congratulations to all of you. And I hope the show opens and it all goes very well for you. Congratulations once again.
Thanks for the invitation.
Good luck for the opening, Christine. Sorry not to be there.
Yes, thank you so much.
Good luck.
Do some good posting on Instagram.
Yes.
Video preferably.
Yes.
Good to know.
Thank you. And just maybe before we go, I would just like to share with our audience that our next session will be on June 25th, Thursday. This is a discussion between Rahab Alana and artists Ashfika Rahman and Sukanya Ghosh, a session that's moderated by Bhuma Padmanabhan, who is one of the co-curators of the CPB 3rd edition. Do join us. All details are there on CPB. Thank you. Thank you so much.